I wonder, on the Richter scale, between Nicodemus in chapter 3 and this woman in chapter 4, where you'd put yourself. I mean, perhaps you're a bit of a Nicodemus as you're here. We feel that, we're doing God a bit of a favor by turning up. And if that's the case, can I say thank you for coming? I'm sure you're very important. We'd rather expect God to be interested in us. After all, everyone else is. We've got so much to offer. Or maybe we feel this evening a bit more like this Samaritan woman. We feel, may I put it this way, almost a touch embarrassed to be here. I mean, if all this is true, if Jesus is the man he claims to be, what have I been doing with my life? I feel unworthy. God can't be interested in me. Well, please remember that that's the very charge that the Pharisees laid against Jesus. That he received bad men and women. Your very unworthiness, if you're here thinking, oh gosh, I've made it, but I just feel so unworthy, is the very condition that triggers God's interest in you. He comes for the improbable, he comes for the irreligious, he comes for the outcast, he comes for the moral failure. Can I tell you, I became a Christian because I'm a bad man. That's why I became a Christian. I knew I was a bad man. I could see it in my heart. And Jesus doesn't care what the world thinks, verse 4. He had to go through Samaria. He had to meet her. He's not hampered by the racist and sexist discriminations of his day. He just wants to meet you. And just to say, as he wants to meet you, here's the key. The qualification for being Christian is not, are you good enough, but are you bad enough? I want to ask you that. Are you bad enough to become a Christian? Now, secondly, what does Jesus do? He promises this woman something. And can you see how this works? Verse 7, he asks for a drink. Jesus moves the conversation to a deeper level, which running water, drinking water, is simply a symbol. So she wants H2O. She wants fresh water. She says, where's your private tap? And Jesus says no. He says, the life of God himself poured into the lives of those who put their trust in me is what I am offering. I'm offering the life of God himself poured into your life. And in chapter 3, verse 34, we've seen that the Son is the one through whom God gives the Spirit without limit. And now we see Jesus promise this sinful Samaritan woman 4 things. There are 4 things that get promised. And honestly, I wonder if you're on the edge of your seat because they are amazing, the promises. Let's see them in verses 10 through to 14. 10 to 14. What are we promised here? Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God, and who is it that asks you for a drink, you'd have asked me, and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. So let's see the 4 promises that he makes about living water. Number 1, it's a gift, John 4, verse 10. Can you see this woman has no idea who Jesus is, what he has to offer, or how it can be received? But there's no ladder to climb to God here. It's a gift. There's no ladder. The thing with a gift is wisdom can't find it, power can't obtain it, money can't buy it, merit can't procure it. You just receive it. And so I say, what is it that disqualifies you from getting a gift? Saying, I don't need the cross, I've got my ladder. I don't need the gift. I don't need you to pay. That's what disqualifies you. As my uncle was dying, I tried to take him communion in a hospital in North Wales. He said, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Secondly, it's living water. Living water, John 4, verse 10. Now, this is a classic Old Testament reference where God declares in Jeremiah 2, verse 3, my people have committed 2 sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. So people have to reject the fresh running supply of God and his faithful goodness leading to eternal life. Instead, they go after other things that cannot bring fulfillment. It's a senseless, shocking betrayal of the one who loved them so faithfully and describes himself as the living water. And Jesus clearly identifies himself with the spring of living water in Jeremiah. So it's a gift, it's living water. And then he says, if you drink it, you'll never thirst again. So can you see what Jesus is promising here? Could this be true? He's saying, here is an end to the spiritual thirst that has dogged you all your life, an end to the never-ending quest for fulfillment. So he says to this woman, I can give you life-giving water that will quench your inner thirst, which all your relationships have not been able to satisfy. Can you see what Jesus is saying here? He's saying, don't be satisfied with broken cisterns, dried up cisterns. Don't be satisfied with career, family, relationship, material things, sport, music, friendship. They're all good, but they can't quench the deeper thirst. They're gifts from the one who can. Don't take those things that are gifts and put that much pressure on them. Come to the source of all those good things. And there's a warning here. If you look to anything to give you the meaning and fulfillment which only Jesus can give, well, you're trying to draw water, we're told, from a broken cistern. It was the apologist Francis Schaeffer, and I say this to married couples about making Jesus central. He said this to those who are in relationships: if you don't feed on Christ, you will feed on each other. Those who know me will know this is true. I've said this so many times before. I exhaust and empty my wife, Lucy. Jesus fills her. That's how the marriage flourishes. I send her off to have a quiet time with Jesus, to abide with him. Then she comes back, then I apologize, then we keep going. But you know, if you as an individual ask someone else to do what only Christ can do, that puts an untenable pressure on the relationship. And Schaeffer said so many marriages have been bust that way. But this is about saying, don't put that pressure. If you don't feed on Christ, you will feed on each other. And so can I ask you just this question here as we're at it? You know, where are you drinking from? Are you being lured to another fountain? And then he says, well, it will become, fourth promise, a spring in you welling up to eternal life. Do you know the difference between a spring and a well? Because Jesus here makes a distinction. A well in the middle of the East was actually a cistern. It took rainwater. But after a long time, it could dry up. So you could build over a well. You could fill it up. It would go dry. But a spring is impossible to build on. It'll just keep bubbling and come through. And Jesus is saying, I'll plant a fountain in you that will never be able to go out. Do you know, one of the amazing things about having contact with Christians in the persecuted church around the world, you meet them and you see the spring. You hear the pressure they're under, and yet you can just see in their eyes the Spirit of Christ bubbling up through them as they keep going, having been locked up and lost loved ones. So when you're most in despair, by my Spirit, the hope breaks through. When you're most confused, by my Spirit, the clarity breaks through. And so can I ask tonight, I don't know where you are, but can I ask if you've invited Christ to become, by his Spirit within you, a perennial spring of life-giving water? Can I tell you, this is what he will do. And I see it in the church family here. I meet people and I see it. I see this bubble in them, and it's such a joy to witness. Now in verse 15, you see the woman still has not got it. She still thinks this is about physical water, about H2O, about running water. So she says in verse 15, Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to drink. You know, I'm a housewife. I just want running water. Where's your private tap? The physical thirst is my problem. And Jesus says, verse 16, go, call your husband and come back. Now, why would he change the subject? He didn't. He didn't change the subject. He did not change the subject. No. She is saying, I'm not spiritually thirsty. That's not my problem. I just want running water. I just need the tap. And he says, oh yeah? Just need the tap? Go and call your husband. I think actually in a much nicer tone than I just used. Oh yeah? Go and call your husband. Verse 17, I have no husband, she replied. In the fewest possible words, she tries to shut down a dangerous subject. And Jesus' reply is absolutely devastating, but it's the tone. Don't you think it was kindly? You're right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is that you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you've said is quite true. I have no husband. How we love to conceal what's really happening in our true nature. Do you know, there's a chilling moment in the film, The Talented Mr. Ripley, when Tom Ripley, Matt Damon, confesses to his lover, don't you just take the past and put it in a room in the basement and lock the door and never go there? And some of you are saying to yourselves right now, look, I'm not in the position of that woman. I've not gone through 5 husbands. That's what you're thinking. I'm not like her. I haven't gone through 5 husbands. But can I say it is about you and me? You'll never get the Christian faith unless you realize this is about you and I. Jesus' knowledge of your life and mine would be just as devastating if it were to be played up on the screen here. And every one of us, to a man and woman, if certain things were played, would never come back. If certain things were played. And you know what? Jesus knows what they are. I don't. He does. And you know what's wonderful about this woman? At the end of verse 18? Do you know what's wonderful? This is what's wonderful. She doesn't run. She doesn't run. She stays to talk. Sir, I can see that you're a prophet. She knows Jesus has had a word of knowledge. That's the miracle here. You know, having been confronted by her sin, her past, her shame, her adultery. What's amazing about her is she doesn't run. So many do. In fact, we're warned in John chapter 3 that so many run. This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. That's why so many run. They're not coming near church because their deeds are evil. And they just say, well, I'm not having that dealt with. No, I'm not going near that. So you see, the great question is this. This is the question. Are you a moth or a bat? Moths head towards the light. Bats fly away from it. Please pray for me that I'll be a moth. I mean, Jesus died for me. I can trust him, but I'll keep heading towards him to confess my sin. We either run towards the light or we run away from it. What are you going to do? Is it going to be revealed? What do you have in your basement? I mean, what's your equivalent of go and get your husband? Because we've all got one. What would Jesus say? And whatever you do, don't think you can get a ladder to climb out of the basement. You need a cross, not a ladder. And the great thing about this woman is that she says, where do I go to get right with God? At the end of the passage, she says, where do I go to get forgiven? And Jesus says, I'm the Messiah. You come to me. And you know, that is the first person who he reveals himself to in John's gospel. This woman. So it's just amazing. He says, come to me. You know, who is the first person he reveals himself to? A Samaritan woman. Because of her beliefs, she's a religious outcast. Because of her race, she was an ethnic outcast. Because of her gender, she was a social outcast. Because of her life choices, she was a moral outcast. And Jesus crosses all those boundaries because he had to meet her. And then on the cross, he cries out, I am thirsty. I am thirsty. He dies of thirst in order to pay in death and blood for our basements, for what's so dreadfully wrong. And the spring of living water himself was so thirsty so that we would never have to be thirsty again.